Well, good evening. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Mask, a trust building and listening tour. This is the fifth and final virtual community engagement event of this school year, hosted by Colorado Springs School District 11. My name is Deborah Ashby. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for D11, and I'm honored to be your moderator this evening. This being our last Beyond the Mask event for this school year, we are exploring what the future may hold for the district. Tonight's Beyond the Mask topic is Taking the Pulse, Community Thoughts Moving Forward. As always, we have a panel of district leaders and experts joining us tonight who will be addressing your questions that have been submitted in advance using the online form. Let's start our evening with introductions of tonight's panelists. When I call your name, panelists, please wave so that we can put a face to the name. We'll start with our Board of Education members, Ms. Darlene Daniels, Board of Education Director. Mr. Chris Wallace, Board of Education Director. And I think those are all of our board members joining us this evening. We'll move on to our staff, Dr. Michael Thomas, Superintendent. Mr. David Inkstrom, Deputy Superintendent, Achievement, Learning, and Leadership. Ms. Phoebe Bailey, Assistant Superintendent, Personnel Support Services. Mr. John McCarron, Assistant Superintendent, Chief Information Officer. Dr. David Colicky, Executive Director, Education Insights. Mr. Glenn Gustafson, Deputy Superintendent, Chief Financial Officer. Ms. Sherry Callback, Executive Director for School Leadership. Mr. Corey Notestein, Executive Director, Student Success and Wellness. And I think that rounds out our staff for this evening. But before we begin our question and answer session with our panelists this evening, I'd like to introduce you to two D11 students who will be helping us out with some questions. Please welcome Doherty sophomore, Daniel Espinal, and Doherty junior, Ezra Stepanek. Thank you both for joining us tonight. I'd actually like to start to ask both of you what your challenges and opportunities during this school year have been. And Daniel, we'll go ahead and we'll start with you.
I think online, it's been good. The way that D11 has handled it, it's been really good.
What kind of challenges have you experienced this school year?
One of the challenges is adapting between school and going online, being at home.
Are you going to choose online or in person for this next quarter?
I'm definitely gonna go with being in person.
And what are you looking forward most to this next quarter?
Just being in person, being able to focus more on schooling, and yeah.
All right, well, thank you. Ezra, what about you? What have been some challenges and opportunities you've faced this school year?
Well, I think it's definitely it's definitely harder to focus when you're like alone in your room doing online school. So I haven't really enjoyed that, but I still think that the teachers have done a good job, and we've had the opportunity to go in hybrid. So even though it's been harder, they've adapted and like they've made it as easy as it can be given the circumstances.
And what are you looking forward to the most this next quarter?
So I'm going in person. I'm just looking forward to like seeing all my friends. Like in my cohort, I don't have like most of my friends are not in my cohort, so I don't get to see them. But now that we're all going in, I get to see the people that I haven't seen in a long time.
Very well, thank you both. We all know that there have been so many challenges to overcome with this pandemic, and we want everyone to know these conversations are a way for us to safely engage with our community. And during this time, we share thoughts and processes that we've used to address these challenges over the school year. As we start our question and answer session with our panelists, please know that 13 questions have been submitted for this event ahead of time using the public form link to our website. We'll begin with those questions, and if time permits, we can start to address questions that may be submitted in the Facebook comments. I just want to remind everyone that this is a community engagement session, and we ask above all things, please be respectful with your comments. We also encourage you to be solution-oriented, and if you have a thought or two on how to positively move forward, please feel free to submit your ideas in the Facebook comments for this feed. We're going to go ahead and start with our questions now. Number one, Daniel, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
I want to say within in-person learning, as much as possible, it's better for everyone. Submitted by a parent.
So this is a comment that was submitted by a parent, and we're going to start with Dr. Thomas first, and then move to Corey Notestein and possibly the EDSLs. What are we doing to help students stay in person? Dr. Thomas, I'll start you off.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you everyone for tuning in to our last Beyond the Mask. Always enjoy and look forward to these conversations, and always enjoy hearing our student perspectives, and they've actually weighed in on some of these questions in the past as well. So, students, if you do have thoughts and perspectives, feel free to be able to share, on this last session. I will say that thank you to that community member who submitted the comment. We have recently polled our community as we've been staging for a return into our classrooms, given the COVID incident rates that are going down throughout the community, as well as the vaccinations that are coming into our community. It's becoming increasingly safe for both staff and students, I should say increasingly safer for staff and students to be in person, which we've always said from the beginning that being in person is the ideal place for education and learning to occur, because that's where the maximum amount of resources are. And so certainly we have many of our families and our students who have chosen to be online and really have thrived in that learning space. And so we'll continue to offer that as an option for families. But we know that a majority of our families all throughout the year, and recently as last week with doing an additional poll, we have between 75 and 80+%, about 81% of our families are seeking to come back into our campuses. And so I just want to reiterate all the fantastic work that our staff have done all throughout this school year to keeping our school environment safe. Even at the peak of COVID rates in our community, our staff were still doing an outstanding job with cleaning and PPE and protocols of distancing and masking, and all those factors to really keep our school environment safe. Quite frankly, many of the superintendents in the region often stated with our public health officials, schools are probably the safest place our students could have been, compared to the mall or a friend's house or things of that nature, because that's where we saw a lot of these breakout situations, and we just didn't see that in our district. So we will continue those practices all the way until the end of the school year, continually evaluate throughout the summer with strong hopes that coming next fall, we'll return to a significant level of normalcy. So that's what we are committed to doing for the last quarter. And you heard a couple of comments from our students tonight about, some online learning is great, but then being connected in the classroom, being able to safely see your peers, that's an important aspect of school as well. So we're excited to open up our schools starting, mid next week.
Great, thank you, Dr. Thomas. Corey, did you have anything to add from your angle?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things that both Ezra and Daniel spoke to. And there's been a lot of conversation in our community around additional educational needs for students, and one being focused on what we call social emotional learning. Sometimes I call that as SEL supports. And they highlighted a couple key things that I think all of us recognize to be true. Especially, I want to call, not to put Ezra there on the spot in terms of what he was speaking to, but he was talking to me about a social network that he's used to being connected to, right? That provides support, provides engagement, growth opportunities, to be with his peers. And while he's with peers in his cohort, those that he feels most connected to, those that he's probably, and I'm putting words in his mouth, so sorry, Ezra, for doing that, but where you find a sense of belonging with your social group, when that's not there, you don't feel the same engagement. It's hard to be engaged in that way. And Daniel spoke to another piece too about the ability to stay engaged and self-manage your time. Self-management is another SEL competency, and one that becomes increasingly hard when you're isolated and alone to stay engaged, to manage your time, to be able to self advocate for your needs in a virtual platform, all become more challenging when our students are not there full time. And I think those are some really key elements that probably the individual that was speaking to is wanting to keep their student in person as much as possible is speaking to. I know we're going to talk a little bit more with other questions about all our COVID protocols and what's out there, so I won't get into a lot of those. But I do want to highlight one that I didn't plan on talking about later, Deborah, that speaks to how might we keep students in person at a greater level. And that's utilizing some our Binax now at-home test kits. We've been working with the State Department of Public Health and Environment to get those available for our staff, right? So all staff have had the opportunity to continue a 30-day supply of at-home test kits. They're rapid COVID test kits that they can take at home, keep themselves protected or identify if they're becoming ill, and then do that on site. What we're also working with is a pilot program to get additional tests that we can provide symptomatic students when they present at school to the families that choose to have them at home, to be able to test their students to early identify if the symptoms they're presenting with are COVID related. And I think that's another way that District 11 has been working with our State Department to try to provide additional barriers for transmission, but also resources that the community can use to slow the transmission and slow as much as possible within our school community.
Thank you, Corey. I want to turn real quick to our two board members to ask them, it's been almost a year to the day that we closed last spring our schools. And I know that the board has expressed a desire to be in person when it's safe to do so. What does it mean to you now that we're moving back towards an in-person environment in a somewhat safer, controlled environment now?
Darlene, you want to take a first crack at that, or you'd like me to?
Sure, thank you. I wasn't sure how you wanted to go first with that. So thank you everyone for attending and being with us tonight. Thank you, Deborah, for the question. I, as a parent, am really excited for the students to be in person. I'm also excited for our students to have the opportunity to get the instructions that they've longed for, they've desired, also having the opportunity to have that social emotional support, and kind of going back to the first question about what we're doing to keep everyone safe. I'm telling you, the protocols we have in place for students to wash their hands and clean the area, it has been phenomenal to watch everyone sync together and make sure that those methods, those methodologies, the mediation is being done in the buildings. I'm also excited for the teachers seeing the students and having opportunities, hopefully, to maybe share some experiences and what's transpired over the last year. It has not been easy for all of us. I am I'm still trying to figure out where to find my place to just rest, but it doesn't feel as if the rest is there just yet. But we're excited. We're excited to know that the community is looking forward to it. The students are looking forward to it. And I'm excited that the lines of communication will continue to stay open as we're moving forward and perhaps have some great ideas for what the fall of 2021 will look like.
Thank you, Director Daniels. Director Wallace, did you have anything to add?
Sure, I'll just pipe in momentarily. I think, I speak for probably just about everyone when I say it's been quite a year. I often say that, this year's been the longest decade of my life. March, 2020 was a tremendous time of uncertainty, and it's been tough. It's certainly been difficult to be outside of the classroom environment. One thing that I'm tremendously appreciative of, the district's response has been consistently we followed the expertise. In March, and through August and onward, some of the expertise said, let's keep them out of school, and there was, again, a lot of uncertainty at that time. Even the experts didn't exactly know what we were dealing with. There's been tremendous, research done. The rate of the vaccine is really a historic accomplishment, for us. And I'm very excited that, now that the experts feel comfortable saying, we're comfortable saying, let's get kids back in school. And that's not a decision made on a whim. That's a decision that is rooted in the idea of expertise, and that we trust our experts, in the same way that our educators are experts in the classroom. The district has done well to follow the guidance of the CDC, knowing that we all want to to have our kids in the classroom, and I'm a parent myself. I know that classrooms are places of equity, and the best place for a student to be is in the classroom. And I am tremendously, tremendously excited that we're getting to a place where we're on the cusp of that, and we're getting there. So I'm really looking forward to where we can go from here. So thanks.
Thank you, Director. Ezra, we're going to jump to you for the second question.
All right, this question was submitted by a community member. It's, why can't districts in El Paso County follow the same plan?
Thank you for that, Ezra. So every district, remember, there's about 16 or so districts just in the immediate vicinity here in Colorado Springs. And the superintendents, we always have met prior to COVID as a leadership group in the region. And then since COVID, we have been meeting every 2 weeks. And we really do try to calibrate our efforts to have as much consistency as possible. From where we sit all the way down south to some of our smaller out of the metro area districts, we have vastly different demographics, vastly different realities. We have much more concentration of population here compared to some of our rural partners who really didn't have as much impact with COVID compared to us. So nothing could be cookie cutter. And I know that the community member is not suggesting everything to be exactly the same, but believe me, we have tried to our fullest extent possible to coordinate our efforts at a grand scale with COVID. Maybe surprisingly, we also try to coordinate when it comes to snow emergencies, and we're on the call with each other, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes as early as 3 in the morning, finding out what each other's districts are doing so that we have some consistent practices. But again, as the weather changes from just 15 minutes across the city, that's how vastly the districts can differ, not only from the environment, but also in terms of our internal practices. So, so we meet as a group, but then we also meet regularly as a group with the El Paso County public health officials. We do have meetings that we've held collectively across the entire state with the governor, and even some of our board directors have met as well to calibrate understandings of what each other's districts are doing in response to COVID. So, that's something that we strive to do. We will continually, again, outside of COVID, work really close together as a superintendent team of the Southern Pikes Peak region moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Any other panelists want to add on to that statement? Seeing none, hearing none. All right, we're going to move on. Daniel, why don't you go ahead with the next question?
This one was submitted by a parent. Do you see D11 limiting class sizes to 25 to 28 students? Research supports smaller class sizes for a variety of reasons.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Daniel. David, we'll go to jump to you first for that one.
Yeah, I'll take it. Daniel, thank you for asking that question, and good evening, everybody. I'm David Engstrom. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Achievement, Learning, and Leadership. So I'm the educational and school side of the house in the district. When a question comes up of how many students should be in a classroom, at the core of that question is, are kids safe in our schools, when we're still in a pandemic, and how many students would be safe in each of our classrooms, you know. And so what we're doing as we've had students in the classrooms and more kids are going to be coming back into the schools, you know, that we're trying to follow all of those practices that we need to follow of social distancing and in particular even seating assignments, so that where students are to sit in a certain place, so that if unfortunately we did have a COVID outbreak, you know, we could target what students would have to be quarantined because of it. And it's really us following all those basic practices of safety is what's going to get us the farthest and keep us the safest when more students return. Because going back to that, there really is no hard and fast number that makes kids safe in a classroom. You know, in our district, we have got classrooms that are huge, and we've got classrooms that are small, and we've got classrooms that are huge that are full of stuff which make them feel small. and so there's no hard and fast rule of only so many students could go in that classroom and be socially distanced to keep themselves safe. And so there's a lot of variables that go into that. But one of the things that we're finding, you know, we staff our elementary schools at about 25 students to a teacher, and then the middle schools are at about 30 students to a teacher, and the high schools about 33 students to a teacher. And yet that varies in each of the schools about how many students actually are in each classroom. And as we're following the numbers of if about 1/5 of our students are going to be staying remote and have remote learning, well, then in all of our classes, about 1/5 of the students aren't going to be there. And so we think it's going to be manageable in our facilities of being able to have students come into their classrooms, because there will be about 20% of the students who are going to be learning from home. And yet, then there are exceptions to that. I mean, a choir at a high school is a large class, but we will follow the safety precautions necessary to keep students safe in that environment. And then in high schools and in middle schools, there's sometimes you have what are called singletons. It's the only class that's offered, and maybe 40 students wanted that class, and that's not 2 sections, that's 1 section. So there's lots of variables that go into it. But the final thing I wanted to say, and then Sherry, if there's anything else you want to add, is about research supporting smaller class sizes, and it does, but it's not smaller class sizes of going from 25 to 24 students or from 30 students to 28 students. It takes a magnitude of a change in class size in order to have an effect in student achievement. And that's down around 17 and 18 students is where that research really shows the sweet spot is for having that effect. And when you think about that, if we're staffed at about twice that many students per teacher, we would have to hire twice as many teachers to be able to get to that ratio, which is cost prohibitive to be able to get down to that ratio at scale throughout the district. So that research isn't about onesies and twosies in a classroom. It really is about a wholesale change at magnitude. So Sherry, is there anything you wanted to add to that too about safety in our classrooms and how students are going to be positioned in the classrooms?
Sure, I'm happy to add just a little bit, and Mr. Engstrom, I would agree with all of what you've shared as well. Additionally, you know, COVID has given us a great opportunity to go back and look at decluttering some classrooms. In many cases, we have either removed extra furniture or rearranged furniture in a classroom to use the space in better and safer ways. We're also looking at space differently. And so, you know, hallways may be utilized for some students to eat lunch in. On a day like today, when the weather is not so great, it's a little challenging to do things outdoors. But most of the rest of this week, when we had gorgeous weather in the 50s, Students could look forward to some picnic style lunches and perhaps a music class outside. So it's also given us some opportunity to look very creatively at how we best utilize the space that we have available, both inside and outside at our schools.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I could just add one thing real quickly, and thank you both. And I do want to just bring up just a touch of research in cost, as well as you heard Deputy Engstrom speak to. So again, the research will show, if you can picture kind of the traditional bell curve, that 15 to roughly 28 to 30 is the average impact of instruction. Like that's where a majority of classrooms sit. Until you get down until that 15 to 17 range, as Deputy Engstrom noted, and until you tip over 30 within certain classes, minus a choir and that kind of thing, that's where you'll start to see effect. The greatest effect on student learning and outcomes is actually the teacher. And it's actually even updated that it's the collective efficacy, meaning teachers working together, that has the greatest effect on learning, not class size, far greater than what people would think than class size. And this is decades of research that has shown this. Additionally, when you look at some of the impacts of student learning with smaller class sizes, which to Deputy Engstrom's point is essentially cutting them in half, to across the country, to reduce class size by one student across every class in the country would cost the U.S. approximately $12 billion. In our district alone, Glenn, if I can phone a friend, to lower class size by one, it's roughly about $1 million.
A little over $1 million these days.
A little over $1 million now, given where we've last hit. So the numbers are very real. And so that's something, obviously, with finite resources, we have to be stewards of the public resources at our disposal. And then when you look at the achievement with the lower class size, and it really needs to start at kindergarten, and at kindergarten level through about third grade, the research shows the achievement gained with the reduction of class size by about 7 shows about 3% of one standard deviation on a standardized test score. And then it diminishes by the time they're in 5th grade to even 1.5% of a standard deviation. So the return in terms of learning and the cost that it takes for that class size is really a challenge based upon all the research that is out there. So I just want to give some more of that theoretical and financial aspect to that conversation. All of what they just said is absolutely true.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Thank you, panelists. Prefacing the next question, which I'll toss to Ezra here in a moment, keeping in mind that we still have in our Return to Learn plan that staff and students are required to wear masks while they're in our schools and our buildings. Ezra, why don't you go ahead with our next question?
This question was submitted by a staff member. It says, can we please get all staff to wear masks, and can we please get the hand washing stations put out again?
I'm going to start with either Sherry or Corey. Which one of you would like to take that first?
I'm happy to, and Sherry can certainly add some additional comments, unless Sherry was eager to jump on and unmute at the first say. I did want to say, Deborah, you're absolutely right that it has been our practice since day one that staff wear masks within our schools. And just actually last week, we had a training on how to properly wear the double mask, that there's some guidance out now from the CDC, and we offered that all to building administrators and supervisors to be able to help train their staff now to properly use 2 masks effectively. The other piece I would say about that is there are incidences where an individual cannot medically tolerate to wear a mask, in which case we do follow the American with Disabilities Act and give guidance and support on alternatives to wearing a cloth mask. And that alternative traditionally has been wearing a face shield by that individual. So while they may not be wearing a 3-ply mask or a cloth mask or a KN95 mask, they are wearing a level of protection that has been shown to be effective to some degree by the CDC, and is also in compliance with the American with Disabilities Act to give them an alternative to wearing something that they medically can't tolerate.
Thank you, Corey. Sherry, did you have anything to add?
Just very briefly, you know, I think through our time in schools since last August, we have seen amazing protocols put in place to ensure that all the way down to our youngest students in preschool at 3 and 4 years old, they know how to wash their hands. There are regular times in the day when it's expected, and that has become a very regular part of practice across our schools.
Thank you, Sherry. Daniel, we're going to go on to the next question. Why don't you go ahead?
This was submitted by a parent, and they said, how do you plan on doing a graduation this year, since this class has missed out on prom and everything that they could do?
Something we struggled with last year, but something I think that we have a little bit more of a handle on this year. Dr. Thomas, would you like to start off? And maybe David Engstrom, would you like to comment as well?
Yeah, I'll start off, and I know we literally just had our first meeting here in the region about that today. So going back to the first question about why can't we follow the same plan, this is a great example of how all districts are working with El Paso County public health officials to coordinate what types of safety protocols would need to be in place for them to be able to sanction and authorize, if you will, graduation ceremonies similar to the process that happened last year. And then what our district's going to be able to do, whether they're doing it in their own footprint of the district, or many of us have extended contracts with the World Arena where we've historically held them. So right now, we are in that planning phase. We are optimistic that we will be able to hold graduations this year. And the likelihood is that they will be at the World Arena this year versus Gary Berry Stadium. But those are some of the details that we're continually working out. Again, our team literally just had our first meeting with people in El Paso County today. So more to come on that with our community.
Okay. David or anybody else?
You know, it's really too early to say anything definite, that we just can't commit to anything definite. And while we would like to, but we have to follow, as Dr. Thomas said, the county guidance about what we can do. And that was very restrictive 1 month ago, but we're already seeing things starting to loosen up about numbers of people that can gather. And so we're really hoping that through what everyone is doing at home of safe practices and the vaccination being out, that by the time May comes around, that we can be hosting, we could be hosting more people than we did last year. But we're working on it, and we will let everyone know when we know what is safe for everyone.
Great, thank you, David. Okay, the next question, we're going to move on. Ezra, do you want to go ahead and read question number 6?
Our next question was submitted by a parent. Its case and death count is 5 to 10 times higher now than in August. What logic was used then to go all virtual versus what is being used now?
I think we'll start with Dr. Thomas and then move to Corey for a little bit of the COVID dial and COVID response that we've heard from El Paso County.
Yeah, thank you. And I probably will request that Corey, who's been our COVID coordinator, if you will, de facto for this duration, he's very much connected to the dials and actually some of the specific questions around death rates, hospitalizations, et cetera, compared from last August to now. So Corey, would you mind taking that one there so you can get into more of the data?
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Thomas. Happy to share some of that. And I'd just like to offer this up as a friendly reminder. Corey is not an epidemiologist, but by any stretch of the imagination. However, I do work daily with El Paso Public Health. We're on the phone with them almost every single day, and for sure emailing them with about cases and updates with the guidance that comes from the state, or from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, that is, local public health guidance, as well as the CDC. And it's always hard to know when someone offers up a point in time what the numbers look like. So I just want to give you where we are today in relation to that. And I think they're important questions because we do look at different metrics to determine what is the best time to do and different events, when to open up our doors in greater capacity. And as of today, when we compare today's numbers, case numbers specifically, and we look at that number at a rate of per 100,000. And when we look at that, our data has been consistent for the last 36 days. And so for 36 days, we had the same case level of per 100,000. Right now, it's about 123 per 100,000 for the entire county. When we talk about case rates, when the question about 5 to 10 times larger, we're actually about 1.78% larger in terms of case rates than we were back in August. But what we're extremely lower at is our hospitalization rates. So case count on average, that rolling average was 5 back in August. That number is now down to 4. When we look at the death rate, that was at a 1.2 average per day, and that number is all the way down to 0.9 or 0.29, excuse me, 0.29 on average per day. So those are drastically lower than they were, as well as our case numbers being elevated. And what we've learned additionally about cases, and what we've heard from Dr. Hurley, who's at the Colorado Department of Public Health, is that when you look at our rates across our state compared to the national numbers, the death rates are drastically lower in Colorado. And then on top of that, over time and where we are today, the size of outbreaks have drastically decreased since where we were at the start of the pandemic. In addition to that, we know that the COVID dial, and this is what Deborah was referencing earlier in the question, has multiple data sets that we evaluate. I alluded to some of them. We also look at positivity rates in the community. Those have been consistent over the last 36 days as well, just hovering above 5%. And we're squarely in the yellow category. And in fact, we're closer in some of the metrics to looking at the green. And that number looks at 100 cases per 100,000. And so we're on the lower side of that case rate, and our hospitalization rates put us in a lower category, and our death rates do as well. Our positivity rates are just above the 5% threshold for green. So we're actually on the very low side of yellow, and what the state recommends at the yellow level is they suggest in-person learning. And so we've been looking at all those data sets. We've been comparing where we were back in August to where we are today. We've been listening to our experts at Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, at our local public health providers, and all of them have been giving us guidance on how to do this safely. So when we talk about returning, not only are we talking about opening it up, we're talking about strategies to mitigate the spread. And so those are some of the things that we've been looking at, which tell us now how things are different than they were back in August when we had to make some tough decisions to go to full remote.
All very good information. Thank you, Corey. Any other panelists discussion? And Corey, we may need to have you come back in with a few other tidbits of information from our health advisors for the next question. Daniel, I'm going to have you go ahead and ask that question.
This one was submitted by a parent, and they said, I wish that hybrid learning remained choice for the remainder of the school year.
Thank you, Daniel. I think we jumped ahead, but we can go ahead and hit that question, or that comment rather. And hybrid learning, there was mixed feelings on hybrid learning throughout the year from families and educators and students alike. Actually, Daniel, I'm going to jump to you and ask you, since you're coming off of hybrid learning, getting ready to go back in person, what were your thoughts about hybrid learning? What were some of your challenges? What were some of your opportunities?
One of my challenges was staying focused at home, I have little siblings, and they always run around and stuff. So it was very hard for me to focus. But one benefit that I saw from online learning was that I actually had time after school and to do my work. And then with being in school, it was really nice because you had that contact with the teacher and you could actually ask questions and get the response very quickly, like getting that in one-to-one conversations and all that.
Very good. Ezra, what has been your experience with hybrid learning this year?
I definitely like going in person more, but I mean it's bearable when you have 2 days online and 2 days in person. It's definitely, like Daniel said, it's harder to focus and ask questions, and there's not as much connection online. And so I have appreciated like just getting to like sit in a room with like people my age instead of like just seeing their names on the screen or sometimes if their cameras are on. So it's definitely better to have that connection. But I mean, and then it also was nice because you knew like you could space out more and be safe because there's less people in person.
Very good. Do any of our panelists want to jump in with their thoughts on hybrid and going back to in-person as we move fourth quarter?
Oh, I thought I heard somebody before me. I'll jump in just real quickly here. So thank you, Ezra and Daniel. I had this conversation with my student cabinet, and actually Ezra's on that that superintendent's cabinet as one of our student leaders. And hearing their perspectives really was very mixed in terms of the hybrid instruction. But I will say that the dominant theme that came out of that discussion with my student cabinet, is that a lot of the instruction was very compressed because I only had 2 days in school. And so there was a lot of introducing of information, but the support, in this, again, I'm generalizing the themes that came from these discussions, the support wasn't as high as many of the students would like and or needed. And then conversely, there was some autonomy so that a student could get the salient information on that lesson launch and then work on an independent pace. And so some of our students who can go through content very quickly really appreciated that. So you can imagine across the district, the hybrid instruction at the high school secondary level of 2 days in and 2 days out on an A/B rotation, and then even some of the synchronous instruction, which was on person and online and simultaneous. Those were some of the cost benefits that we've heard from many of our colleagues throughout the district. There's pros and cons with it. I anticipate as we move into next year that if we're able to have a more regular physical presence as well as our Spark Online Academy, we're going to hear from many of our families that having some elements of online instruction or some kind of flipped or hybrid models in school, if you will, in session, still might occur based upon unique schedules and things of that nature to be able to give students what they need. So that is something that what we've learned a lot from COVID, really accelerated some of our own pedagogy and practices in the classroom that we want to carry forward, even when we're in person. because we found different ways to reach the students' learning needs.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and jump to you again for question number 9.
This was submitted by a parent, and they said it seems like return to full-time in-person learning should wait until 2 weeks after all the staff had the opportunity for both doses of the vaccine.
Thank you. I'm actually going to jump to Glenn for your comment on timelines of staff vaccines. I know you have a little bit of data there.
We do. I'm Glenn Gustafson, and I'm the Deputy Superintendent, and we're over the healthcare plan, and we're working very closely with both University Hospital and Penrose Centura Hospital to get as many vaccinations into our staff as possible. As of late last week, we've already had 3,900 staff members, excuse me, 3,900 staff members that have been scheduled for at least their first dose. Some of them have already received their second shot. So we know we only have about 4,000 employees total. So that means almost every staff member has been scheduled for their first shot already and is within 3 weeks of getting their second shot. So that's great news for us. Corey mentioned a lot of the statistics on how we're being safe in classrooms, how we're still practicing all the protocols that we need to. But you can imagine that with the first vaccine shot being at least 62% effective, we're getting very close to having almost all of our staff fully vaccinated and ready to go. I don't think it will be long before all of our staff that choose to be vaccinated, not all of them will be vaccinated by their own choice, where we really won't have many challenges with our staff members in terms of quarantine. Students still are not being vaccinated, and so that will be a while before that happens, and we'll still have quarantines because of that. But I think our staff people are going to be very safe. We've had very few cases of COVID transmission amongst our staff, and by being vaccinating, following the safety protocols, really we should be in excellent shape for the remainder of the school year.
Thank you, Glenn. Ezra, do you want to move on to the next question for us?
This question was submitted by a staff member. It says, should you consider continuing asynchronous days so teachers have planning time and can avoid stress and burnout?
I'm going to open that up to all of our panelists. Who wants to jump in?
So I'll start with the response. We had various models of instruction since the start of the school year in response to live data that would tell us to change our model. About the fall break time or so, that's when we were hearing from a lot of our elementary staff stating that teaching both in person and online at the same time was causing some significant challenges. And we tried to problem solve a variety of different ways, and we came to the conclusion to add that Monday as a day of asynchronous learning so that we could balance between the workload that we were hearing about and the development of our staff and their ability then to connect on smaller groups or one-to-one with students, which was similar to what was happening at the secondary. And elementary and secondary, just from a format standpoint, are vastly different. And so the needs are different. Outside of COVID, you see very different schedules and that kind of thing because, they're apples and oranges, quite honestly. But we saw that we might need to have some similarities. So we did that. And then obviously around that fall break time, the entire system and pretty much every district around us went fully online just because of the sheer staffing challenges that we were having, given the quarantines that Deputy Gustafson was just talking about, that many of our staff were subject to out of precaution. when we came back, we were getting feedback from many of our families, again, that, you know, the asynchronous Monday wasn't a value add for them. Now, certainly we were helping, you know, address an issue that we identified internally. But going forward, and why we're going into the 5 days without that asynchronous is that we are solving for the initial challenges, and that was that synchronous instruction, trying to do both. Now, there are many staff who are choosing to do that, and they will continue to choose to do that, and that's something that we fully support. But we are finding ways to make sure that staff are able to do one or the other, so that there's some dedication to students who are online and dedication to students who are in the classroom. Secondary also will be going into that 5 days. And again, because of the uniqueness of the secondary models, you know, we have the late starts that are happening at our high schools to accommodate for some of the adjustments that they've had to make within that unique structure to high schools.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Any other panelists? Hearing none, seeing none? All right. Daniel, we'll move to you for the next question.
This question was submitted by a parent, and they said data shows how non-threatening this virus is, how masks are more harmful, and how getting vaccinated won't help. Can we be aware of this and show the way?
Thank you for that. I'm actually going to open this up to the panel, but just hearing a little bit about what Corey had talked to us about from the El Paso County Public Health Department's perspective, as well as the Colorado Department of Education and CDPHE, we know that we've been abiding by a lot of their health and safety measures. Just wanted to get other folks' thoughts on this comment.
Go ahead, Director Daniels.
Thank you. I think I'll just speak from a personal place with this one, simply because I've had family across the nation that I've lost for a long period of time with this virus. And it has been devastating to the family for various reasons. I understand that there are contradicting perspectives with regards to wearing it, not wearing it. We've had this conversation for months now. I think the other thing to remember is if I choose to wear a mask, the last thing I want to do is make you uncomfortable because you chose not to, and vice versa. But I have to remember that I've had enough evidence in my life that says if I don't take the precautions necessary, then I could open the door to something that I do not want my family to contend with. And even if we look at students prior to the pandemic getting sick with just a head cold or allergies, it threw things out of sync if the parents didn't have a way to cover that, or they didn't know how they were going to work and still take care of the kid, and vice versa. It still feels like that's where we are, even with the virus. But the one thing I want to make sure that we're being careful about is that we're not abusing abnormal use of a thing, a person, and a place, and a system, trying to mitigate human choices. Human choices are happening all day long. And when we think a system is supposed to change somebody's mind or cause someone to do something other than what you think, then technically what you're saying is when we talk about those districts doing what they do, and yes, there are variants to that, it's also based on individuality, right? That's what everybody's fighting for, so I can be an individual and never really thinking of the collective whole. Maybe now we may start that, I don't know, but it's still a very real struggle for the mindset of people to understand this is a part of a whole. Education wasn't supposed to settle the gambit of all the issues. We're only doing a small part, but it still takes all of us to do what we need to do to help our neighbor. And again, maybe that goes back to individuality, because I'm raised on a community mindset, but technically what I know from my own experience and my family, we're taking the hit and have taken the hit for months. I'm going to take the evidence and I'm going to say, based on that truth for my life, I'm going to choose to wear a mask, but I'm not going to make you wrong if you choose not to. I just ask that you stay 6 feet apart. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective, Director Daniels. Anyone else want to share?
Deborah, if I might just give some context to Director Daniels' comment, we've seen nearly 6,000 deaths in the state of Colorado and over 500,000 deaths in the United States. We know this is, while those are numbers, I think Director Daniels' point, that's someone's family member. And we don't know how that's impacting individuals, but it's surely creating disruptions for families. It may not be impacting me as an individual, but it's impacting my neighbor or my community members. And those are things I think we need to continually be mindful of as we move forward and how we protect our community at large. There's other data that suggests too that as we move out of this pandemic phase into something called an endemic, which means this virus could exist in our communities for long periods of time, very similarly what the flu has been for us. There's current projections and models looking that this virus could be 2 to 5 times more deadly than the annual flu. And so if we think about that in context, again, that's going to be continually impacting families and communities at large. And if we can do everything in our capacity to drive down these numbers, to save the lives of those that could potentially be lost, I think that speaks to Director Daniels' point very well. And so I appreciate her perspective. And I understand different philosophies, but those are just some numbers that relate to what the actual data says about what's happening in our community.
Thank you
Is
for
it okay
sharing
if
that.
I'm sorry, Deborah, is it okay if I jump into that real quick?
Yes,
Just
please.
another note. Perhaps people have not had anyone in their life in this last year that they've lost. But just to keep it real with you, I've lost over 10 people. I, for one, do not need anybody else to say to me, manage your life accordingly. And because managing my life has been my core value, I'm not going to stop now simply because other people think it doesn't work for them. I've taken the communication from this country, from its systems, from their way of being, and everything that they've done. And I've said, thank you for telling me. I will do what I have to do to guard and protect. Now, for those of you that do not have that layer or level of experience and interaction the way that I've had on my side of the fence, I'm saying this might be the opportunity to realize we weren't making it up. It's real. When others do not follow suit and what needs to be done, it causes problems. And now, perhaps there'll be a little bit of empathy and sympathy on that, maybe not. But I just want you to understand, some of us have been in pain for months because of the loss. And I am not going to excuse that off simply to make it a argument. I don't have time for arguments. I'm going to go straight to, this is what I need to do, 6 feet apart. Back it up.
We've definitely seen a lot of heartbreak from this pandemic, and we've definitely opened up a lot of different conversations. So thank you for sharing your perspective, Director Daniels. Ezra, we're going to move on to our second to last question that was submitted ahead of time. So why don't you go ahead and read question number 12.
This question was submitted by a parent. It says, I would like to have fewer disruptions to the school schedule. It seems like the schools closed down for exposure that's 2 and 3 people removed. How does the quarantining work?
And this is a good one because our quarantine practices have slightly been changed over the course of the year, correct, Corey?
Yes, we've modified our quarantine practices in alignment with the state, and as they've learned about how the virus spreads, they've modified the guidance which we adopt wholeheartedly in our district. And I think to speak to how the quarantine practices work, and I think that some of the questions too is that perhaps we might be over quarantining some that are second or third and removed from the experience. And I can tell you to date, what we are looking at is contact tracing that would say if an individual is within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. And so imagine if you're sitting in a classroom and let's say Corey is the one that is ill and contracts COVID, we'd be looking at the radius around Corey and who was in that radius. If everyone is masked, that's a 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. Those would be direct contacts, and those individuals would need to quarantine. There are things that would prevent someone from being quarantined, and Glenn spoke to this a little bit about the vaccine, right? When people are fully inoculated, 2 weeks removed from their second dose, quarantines won't be required for staff. Also, if you've contracted COVID within the last 90 days, for sure those individuals don't need the quarantine. The data would show that they have antibodies to protect them. So we were following the guidance again of the Colorado Department of Public Health to say those individuals wouldn't quarantine. Additionally, if you were to remove your mask, and this happens, and Sherry can speak to this a little bit more too, because it happens with our elementary group when they're eating, mostly in cafeterias or classroom environments, that radius gets a little bit bigger, right? So it goes from 6 feet to 12 feet, and those would be the people that we'd be targeting. And I do want Sherry to speak a little bit to this too. Schools have gone to great lengths to identify those individuals. Nursing staff has identified those and worked with principals to help families and to stay quarantined for 10 days. And that number has changed too. And I forgot to mention that, Deborah, is that we've gone from a 14-day quarantine down to a 10-day quarantine, which is keeping students, getting them back sooner. And we're also seeing fewer being quarantined because of that radius. But I want to give Sherry the opportunity too to speak to the practical things that we're seeing in our schools.
Sure, thanks, Corey. And, I can certainly empathize with this one. I think everybody in this virtual room tonight would like to see fewer or no more schedule changes. We know that there is significant impact on families every time we do have to quarantine. And so we are thankful that we're at a safe place to use some of this targeted quarantining instead. Corey mentioned a lot of what I would say in terms of looking at where students eat, because obviously they have to be unmasked while they're eating. And so, can we get them spaced out a little further than what we would normally do in a cafeteria? Again, on nice days, can we get them outside to eat? Because there's great opportunity for spacing there. Earlier this school year, what we tended to see with quarantines was that it wasn't a huge number of cases in a school, but what would happen is that just 1 or 2 positive cases would wind up quarantining enough staff members that we no longer had enough staff available to run a grade level, or in some cases even a school. And so that's why we saw these large quarantines of a whole grade or a whole school for 2 weeks, or those kinds of time frames. We are very hopeful with the large numbers of staff being vaccinated that we're getting very close to a place where we don't have to do those mass quarantines anymore, and that we'll still have plenty of staff available to run the school and won't have to send all sorts of kids home who, this parent is absolutely right, are 2 or 3 people removed from the actual student or staff member who had a positive case. We're also paying very close attention to seating charts. to where students are throughout their day in physical proximity to others, because all of these pieces, when they're carefully documented, do really help us to limit the number of students and staff that are impacted by any quarantine.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Corey. Daniel, we're going to have you round us out with the last question, and we may have some time to get to a few themes that we're seeing in our chat. But Daniel, why don't you go ahead and read our last question?
So the last question said it was submitted by a grandparent, and they said, will in-classroom learning still be using iPads or computers most of the day going forward? Or will it be more teacher and student interaction?
And I'm going to open this up for either Sherry or David Engstrom to join in with thoughts moving forward on that.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Daniel, thank you. I bet you're kind of happy that was your last question that you had to read. So thank you for all you've done tonight. Will we still be continuing on with a majority of the time being on an iPad or a tablet or a computer? I guess the way I'll state it is only if the family wants that, because next year we're launching an online school. We'll have Spark Academy Online is going to be available for any family that said, this is the way we like to learn. And my child has thrived in this environment. So this is a plug for you. If you like learning online and your child liked learning online, please enroll your student in Spark Online. For next year, it'll be kindergarten through 8th grade, and we are enrolling students now. But was the grandparent wrote of saying, will it be more in person, and will there be more teacher and student interaction? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. We are grateful for one thing through this pandemic, and that we now have been able to tip into an environment where we have a laptop and a device for every student in the district, and we're going to continue with that. And yet that is a tool for the teacher to use with the student for the instruction. And that tool will be used for supplemental activities. It may be used for specific activities, but it is not going to be the sole means of delivery of instruction in a classroom in the future. Because, I mean, technology is great when used appropriately. And the fact that we'll be at a place in the district of where students in the past that may not have access to technology, that we can provide it for them to be used appropriately. And there is a place for it. And as we all know, that we live with technology, but we don't want to be on it all the time, 24/7. So please, if you have found that your child likes learning remotely and has been successful, enroll them in Spark Online. Call our enrollment office. I wish I had that phone number off the top of my head, but Dr. Colicky might have that memorized. But no, we are going to strive to have much more teacher interaction when we get back closer to normal for next school year.
Sherry, that Spark Online, just want to reiterate, that's for any student. So, any student in Colorado Springs who would like to, enroll on Spark Online, again, you're more than welcome to. And families, if you go to d11.org, in the upper left, I believe, is where we have the Spark Online. And then, that is a place that you can go and get all the information you can. And we're taking enrollment right now, and they're already filling.
Yeah, look at me. I think you have to call in order to enroll when you can do it through technology, right? Of course.
But the phone number is 520-2297. So
2 options.
d11.org/enrollment, I think. As we round out tonight's questions, I wanted to go back. We want to circle back to a question that we got about the variant from the UK. We know that that's another concern that we've been hearing about in the general media. Corey, I want to jump to you. Is it too early to start in-person learning? What are we hearing about the UK variant, and how are we addressing that within District 11?
Yeah, Deborah, that's a great question. And there's a lot we still don't know about the variants within our state, but also within the country. You might be hearing the UK variant, or you might be hearing it as B.1.1.7. That is the other term often used for that variant of COVID-19. And what we know right now is that the CDC has recognized 114 cases within the state of Colorado. We also know that this first showed up in our state in December. And what we believe from hearing from the experts is that when we identify a case being here, that variant was already in our state prior to that, because the individual didn't travel overseas, no known contacts with overseas travelers. So that variant was unfortunately already in our state, spreading throughout our community, which we saw large case numbers in and around the December timeframe. So there's some wondering about this, is that variant already been here in our community, which we weren't actually testing for with great numbers. We also know that there's two other variants that actually have no case in our state. One's called P1 and the other one's B.1.351. And those are two other primary variants that are coming out of other countries and potentially going to be here in our country as well. But here's what the CDC says that we don't currently know about them. They say how widely these new variants will spread. They don't know that for sure in our country. And they don't know how different that the virus that's caused by these variants differ from the previous variants. And we also are 100% sure how effective some of these treatments are, therapies are for these variants. We have seen research coming out from Moderna and Pfizer about their effectiveness on these variants to greater degrees. And so there's still a lot of unknown about how that will impact our community. But the primary vaccines right now, Pfizer and Moderna, that are in our community have been shown to be effective. Maybe not to the same degree of the 95% threshold we're seeing with them with the primary virus or variant in our community, but they are still highly effective against the B.1.1.7. So Deborah, that's what we know right now. Still too early to know a lot, but we are seeing all the same practices to prevent the spread should be utilized with these variants. So socially distanced, wearing masks, good hand hygiene, engage in the vaccine when appropriate for you and your family. And those things can continue to combat the spread of any variant within our community.
Thank you, Corey. Adding on to that, I have another question from our chat tonight that I want to get to. Just to clarify, Shannon Rogers asked, if staff members wear masks and face shields, they don't have to quarantine, as we've been discussing. Can our kids do the same?
Right now, we don't have that specific guidance from CDPHE. Now, the difference between just saying they're masked, it actually has to meet a mask threshold. So they have to have a KN95 mask or an N95 mask. And many of our families don't have them because those are hard to come by and they're restricted primarily for medical providers. The state has provided quantities for our teachers to be able to use within our schools, and so we do have those available to staff. Again, they need to wear that level of mask as well as a face shield. We're hopeful, and we've been hearing that in the next month or so we will be getting updated guidance, and that may be a part of the guidance coming out from the state, but as of right now we have to still follow the current guidance, and that's not available at this time as outlined for students.
Thank you for clarifying that for us, Corey. We did get another question in the chat. I think we talked a little bit about hybrid learning earlier in the course of the evening. Still some folks out there wishing we could do hybrid. Why is hybrid not an option for fourth quarter? I'm just going to open this up to the panel.
I'll start, and then Sherry, if you want to think if there's something I don't cover with it, it gets really problematic for schedule building with hybrid learning, and when we're creating schedules of taking attendance for students and knowing who is going to be there, that just gets very difficult and adds, some additional stress onto our teacher load. And then even think in terms of, for hybrid learning, a teacher is prepping for the specific number of students that they're going to have in the classroom and the specific number of students that might be learning remotely. And so when a teacher is prepping, if on any given day that number is changing based on what student's going to be there and what student isn't going to be there, again, that really adds to the workload of the teacher to be able to try to provide that support. And we're trying to keep it in the fourth quarter, as consistent as we can for the instruction in that classroom, so a teacher isn't having to change their preparation every single day because they may have different students in the classroom and different students online. And so that's one of the reasons. And then there's also the very technical reason of how schedules are run and how students are documented in our system, that it gets very, very complicated to have hybrid continue. Sherry, is there anything else you want to add with that?
Really, you covered that well. When I think about options that we're offering to families, I think we can get to a place in our schools where we can do remote learning and fully in-person learning with quality. And as we start to add additional options to that and we stretch people even further, we don't want to get to a place where the options that we offer are not quality options.
Very good. Thank you both. I wanted to end with just one more question before we open it up for a panel discussion to round out the evening. Karen Lee on Facebook asks, when will parents know what, if any, the plans and options will be for any additional instruction support during the summer? And I know we've had a lot of conversation about that. So I'm going to open that up for David and Sherry again to address that question.
We are building it right now, and we hope within the next couple of weeks that we're going to be able to announce what that's going to look like. Because as we are building it, first of all, we know there is a need, because we know that this has not been optimal to be in this environment for almost a whole calendar year, and that the impact on student learning has been tremendous. And so we know that there will be families and students that will have the need that they're going to want to have additional time in a school when we can get back to more in person. And so we're going to be building schedules for the summer of whether that's going to be a June term or a June and a July term. And yet we also know we have to have staff that is available and willing to be able to teach after a very, very stressful year. And so right now we are collecting a lot of data, and that is really internally to our staff of who is available and willing to be able to teach at every grade level, kindergarten through 12th grade. And as we are collecting that's going to determine how many sites we could have open, how many schools we could have open, how many terms that we could run, which would then mean of how many students that we can service. Because we know it's important, and we're going to be offering things, and yet we also know we have to have staff that's equipped to be able to do it. And then as we are building this program, it's not, the research shows that it just shouldn't be for interventions. It just shouldn't be for drilling fractions and just doing that type of an activity. Is that there has to be enrichment included with it, of application and the practical side of applying your knowledge in order for true learning to happen. And so it's going to be a mix of enrichment and interventions as we are looking to close the gaps that have been created during this pandemic. So stay tuned. We just aren't prepared to announce it yet.
Thank you, David. I'm going to close us out, but before I do, I want to ask the panelists, thinking back to 1 year ago, again, almost to the date, when we had to jump off into the unknown and do something unprecedented, closing schools back in March last spring. What have we learned from this year, and how are we moving the district forward as there seems to be some hope on the horizon now, and we're starting to see society move more towards normalcy?
Thank you, Deborah, for the question. I think that's probably the question that keeps most of us from sleeping through the night and waking up at 2 o'clock. Trying to answer that every night. This has truly been the most trying year in my entire career. And I wage to say that many of my colleagues feel the same. I think it really exemplified our deep commitment in District 11 to doing what we believe is the absolute best and the absolute safest for our students and our staff and the broader community. I think back to when many of us on this call tonight were huddled in an office downstairs from my office, literally right below my office. And we were sitting around a table thinking, well, this might just be the next couple of weeks. We'll be okay. And then here we are, like you said, a year later. And I literally have that image burned in my head about what that looked like. And the board meeting prior to that, where I lean over to our board president and say, the NBA just got canceled for the season. Tom Hanks just announced. I mean, we had all these markers in our mind when such a tragedy hit our world. And, you know, leading through this, I've often stated that, and many have stated, I should say, not, these aren't my words, you know, crises don't build character. They demonstrate the character that you already have. And the character in D11 is extremely strong, extremely caring, extremely supportive of each other, students, and are dedicated and committed to this community. I can't thank our staff enough for everything that they've done, considering all of what they have been through. It's been a lot. To our students, you know, we got a couple here tonight. Those of us here as well, that we live it as parents as well, and as staff. This has been a trying year for them as well. And of course, our families juggling between supporting students at home, trying to go to work, and trying to do that at the same time oftentimes. And you having one another kind of knocking on the bedroom door or the basement floor and saying, hey, you're being too loud, I'm on a call, right? I mean, these are real conversations. I don't know if any of you have lived that, but that's been my reality with my kids. So it's been a challenge. Would I do it again? This is the one situation in my life I would never want to do over. And moving forward, what does this look like for us? Well, I will say this. Prior to COVID coming into the world, District 11 was already ahead of the curve. We had already launched a brand new strategic plan with the heavy support of our community. We had already opened up the engagement with our academic master plan, and then just started to engage the community about our facilities master plan, all of which were in the hopper before COVID hit. But now fast forward to where we're at today. That critical work that we had a vision for before COVID is so appropriate now, even more so. Many districts are going to be in the situation that we are currently in and rethinking and reimagining and rebuilding their districts. Well, kudos to our board for their strong support and our community for their engagement, that we set that vision over a year ago for this district because it was just the right thing to do. We knew this was something that we needed to do. And so that's the work that we know we're going to continue to move forward as we come out of COVID. As we've stated, we have to come out of this fundamentally different. Shame on us if we waste this crisis to do something better for our students, our staff, and this overall community. but our board, our staff, we're committed to doing that. That's what I see us taking forward from COVID and our learnings over this past year, and finding ways that we can just show up better for each other and for our community.
Very well said. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Hard to follow that one up, but I will open it up if any other panelists want to give their parting comments. Seeing none, hearing none.
So Director Daniels.
Director Daniels?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, Deborah, thank you. I just wanted to add to what Dr. Thomas said. For years prior to this pandemic, there were lots of conversations of how we needed to shift. And everyone knows, well, maybe not everyone knows, you can't correct the things that are not working with the same mindset that put it in place. So here we are with an opening and an opportunity to shift in our way of doing things, our way of thinking. And again, shame on us if we let this close and we not do what we've all known we've had to do for quite some time. Sometimes we ask for things and the universe shows up, may not look like you want it to look, feel the way you want it to feel. And I concur with Dr. Thomas. This year has not been one that I would like to see repeated in my lifetime. However, we're here now. It's time for the backbiting to stop, the upset, the offenses, whatever it is, and get to work so that we can do what's best for our children, for our nation, as well as our state. And we know that we can do this. We've been doing great. It's not time to lose momentum.
Very well said. Thank you. And I would just want to thank you all tonight and for all the time that you've committed to these community engagement sessions that we've had throughout this school year. And we thank Daniel and Ezra tonight too. You guys stepped up and helped us express the student point of view. We hope for a good rest of your school year to both of you, as well as all of our students in District 11. We know that community engagement has looked different this year. And as with most things, we know how important it is to engage with our community, all of our stakeholders. We thank you, our viewers, for participating and being a part of these dialogues that we've had. It's given us a great chance to have conversations with you, to get your insights and input, and to hear feedback from our community. Please stay healthy and well. Good night.